The fork clattered against the porcelain plate like a gunshot in the silence of our Tampa Bay dining room. My son Caleb's words still hung in the air, poisonous and sharp. "Face it, Dad, you're nothing but a washed-up failure. At least Mom's new husband Carson actually made something of himself." The ceiling fan whirred overhead, pushing around the humid Florida evening air, but it couldn't cool the fire that had just ignited in my chest. Before we dive in, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means the world to me. I didn't respond. Not yet. But 7 days later, Caleb would be standing in an empty driveway with nothing but the clothes on his back, and my ex-wife would call me in absolute panic, begging me to undo what I'd set in motion. What she told me that night would change everything, not just about Caleb, but about the web of lies that had been spun around our family for years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that dinner, to the moment when 32 years of being a father collided with the harsh reality that sometimes love isn't enough. The smell of blackened grouper still lingered in our Clearwater home, mixing with the salt air drifting through the screened porch where we'd moved for dessert. It was one of those perfect Florida evenings in late March, the kind where the temperature hovers just right, and the sunset paints the Gulf Coast sky in shades of orange and pink that no postcard could ever capture. My daughter Sophia sat to my left, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sunlight filtering through the palm fronds in our backyard. At 29, she had her mother's grace but my stubborn streak, though she wielded it with more wisdom than I'd ever managed. Across from me sat Caleb, 31 years old and built like the linebacker he'd been in high school, before he decided college was too restrictive and dropped out junior year. We'd been talking about nothing consequential. Sophia's new marketing job at the advertising firm downtown, the red tide that had been plaguing our beaches, whether the Lightning would make the playoffs. Normal family stuff. The kind of conversations I'd cherished since the divorce 5 years ago, when these dinners became our sacred ritual. Then Caleb started in about Carson. "You know, Dad, Carson's thinking about expanding his real estate empire again," he said, dragging his fork through the key lime pie I'd picked up from his favorite bakery. 3 more properties this month. Guy's got the golden touch. I should have seen it coming. Caleb had been dropping Carson's name more frequently lately, always with that tone of admiration he'd never quite managed when talking about me. Carson Blackwell, my ex-wife's husband, a slick-talking real estate mogul who'd swooped in during the messiest part of my divorce from Miranda. "That's nice, son," I said, keeping my voice neutral. After 35 years in construction, building everything from luxury condos on the beach to affordable housing in East Tampa, I'd learned when to pick my battles. "Nice?" Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, the man just closed a deal on a waterfront development worth $43 million. That's not nice. That's legendary." Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, shooting her brother a warning look. "Caleb, maybe we could talk about something else?" But he was just getting started. I could see it in his eyes, that familiar combination of frustration and entitlement that had been growing stronger over the past few years. The same look he'd worn when I'd refused to co-sign for the jet ski he wanted but couldn't afford. The same expression when I'd suggested he might want to find his own apartment, instead of living rent-free in the condo I'd bought him. "You know what I realized today?" he continued, his voice gaining momentum like a hurricane building over warm water. "I've been thinking about success all wrong. I keep looking at what Dad does, laying concrete, framing houses, getting his hands dirty, and I thought that was honorable work." My grip tightened on my water glass. The condensation made it slippery, but I held on. "It is honorable work," Sophia interjected firmly. "Dad built half the developments between here and Orlando. He put us through school, kept us fed, gave us everything we needed." Caleb waved her off dismissively. Sure, basic survival stuff. But Carson, he builds empires. He sees the big picture. While Dad's down in the trenches getting dirty, Carson's up in the penthouse making decisions that actually matter." The words came out like venom, each one carefully chosen to cut deep. I'd heard whispers of this attitude before, comments Miranda had made during our custody negotiations about how Carson was more ambitious and had real vision. But hearing it from my own son, sitting at the table I'd built with my own hands, in the house I'd worked 60-hour weeks to pay for, that was a different kind of pain altogether. "Caleb, that's enough," I said quietly, but he was already standing, his chair scraping against the terracotta tile I'd installed myself 10 years ago. "No, Dad. It's not enough. It's time someone said what we're all thinking." His voice rose, carrying across our yard and probably into the neighbors. "You're small time. You always have been. Content with your little construction jobs and your little paychecks while the world passes you by." Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Caleb." "Face it, Dad. You're nothing but a washed-up failure," he continued, his words picking up speed and venom. "At least Mom's new husband Carson actually made something of himself. He's got vision, connections, real power. I think it's time I started calling him Father from now on because, let's be honest, what have you ever really accomplished?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ever-present chorus of cicadas seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I sat perfectly still, my knuckles white around that water glass, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. Sophia recovered first, her voice shaking with anger. "How dare you talk to Dad like that? Do you have any idea what he's sacrificed for us? The hours he worked, the vacations he skipped, the times he went without so we could have what we wanted?" But Caleb was beyond reason now, riding the wave of his own righteousness. Sacrificed? For what? So we could live this mediocre middle-class life while Carson's showing us what real success looks like? I'm done pretending Dad's way is the right way. Carson gets results. With that, he grabbed his keys from the counter, keys to the BMW I'd co-signed for, parked in the driveway of the condo I'd bought him, and stormed toward the door. "Where are you going?" Sophia called after him. "To Carson's yacht," he threw over his shoulder. "At least there I'll be around people who actually understand how the world works." The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the pictures on the wall. Through the window I watched him peel out of the driveway, leaving rubber marks on the concrete I'd poured myself. Sophia was by my side in an instant, her hand on my shoulder. "Dad, I'm so sorry. He didn't mean it, he's just... I don't know what's gotten into him." But I knew. I'd seen it building for months. The way he name-dropped Carson at every opportunity, the constant comparisons, the growing resentment toward everything I'd built for our family. Miranda and Carson had been working on him, subtle at first, but increasingly bold in their efforts to turn my son against me. "It's okay, sweetheart," I told Sophia, though we both knew it wasn't. "He's just confused right now." She hugged me tight, and I could feel her trembling. "This isn't fair, Dad. You've given us everything." As I held my daughter in that moment, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, the same brand she'd used since high school, I made a decision. Not an emotional one, but a calculated choice born from 35 years of building things that last. If Caleb wanted to see what failure looked like, I'd show him. If he thought Carson's way was superior, he could live by Carson's rules. And if he truly believed I was nothing but a washed-up failure, then he could discover exactly what life looked like without my mediocre support. The foundation I'd built for him was about to crumble, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with tearing something down. That night, after Sophia had reluctantly headed back to her own apartment, I sat alone on my screened porch, nursing a Corona and watching the lights of boats drift across Tampa Bay. The water was unusually calm, like glass reflecting the stars, but my mind was anything but peaceful. I kept replaying Caleb's words, each repetition stoking the fire that had started during dinner. Washed-up failure. Small time. Carson actually made something of himself. 31 years of being that boy's father, and this was what I got in return. My phone buzzed against the wicker table beside me. A text from Miranda. "Heard Caleb had dinner with you tonight. Hope you didn't fill his head with any more of your small-minded thinking. Carson's offered him an internship at his firm. Real opportunity for once. I set the phone face down without responding, but the message confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't random rebellion from Caleb. This was orchestration, a campaign to turn my son against everything I represented. The memories came flooding back then, uninvited, but crystal clear. Caleb at 8 years old, following me around job sites during summer break, his little heart had askew and his eyes bright with curiosity, as I explained how foundations worked. "Dad, can you teach me to build houses too?" he'd asked, and I'd promised him that someday I would. Caleb at 16, using his first paycheck from a part-time job to buy me a coffee mug that read, "World's Greatest Dad." He'd been so proud, presenting it to me over breakfast, saying he wanted to follow in my footsteps. Caleb at 22, fresh from dropping out of college, promising me he'd pay back every cent I'd invested in his education once he figured things out. That was 9 years ago. And now, Caleb at 31, calling Carson father while living in the condo I'd purchased, driving the car I'd co-signed for, and eating dinner paid for by the construction business he'd just called small time. The anger crystallized into something colder, more focused. I pulled out a legal pad and began making lists, the way I'd learned to do when planning complex construction projects. Assets under my name, financial obligations I'd undertaken on Caleb's behalf, documentation I'd need to protect myself legally. The BMW lease. My credit, my responsibility, but his possession. The condo in South Tampa. My down payment, my mortgage, his residence. The monthly allowance, $800, transferred automatically every first of the month for the past 3 years. The credit cards, 3 different accounts where I was the primary holder. He was an authorized user. The cell phone plan, family account, his line paid by me. The health insurance, extended family coverage that cost me an extra $300 monthly. Line by line, I tallied up the support I'd been providing. It came to over $4,000 a month, more than many families lived on entirely. All of it flowing to a man who just called me a failure. By midnight, I had a plan. I was at the BMW dealership when they opened at 8 a.m. the next morning, my folder of documentation tucked under my arm like a battle plan. The humid Tampa air was already thick with the promise of another scorching day, but inside the air-conditioned showroom, I felt nothing but cold determination. "Mr. Rodriguez?" The finance manager, a thin man named Bradley with nervous energy, looked confused as he reviewed my paperwork. "You want to repossess your son's car?" "It's not his car," I corrected, sliding the lease agreement across his desk. "My name, my credit, my legal responsibility. I'm exercising my right to reclaim the vehicle." Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Well, technically, yes, you have that right. But this is highly unusual. Have you spoken to your son about—" "My son made his position very clear," I interrupted. "He prefers his stepfather's approach to life. He can ask his stepfather for a car." 20 minutes later, I was driving the silver BMW back toward Caleb's condo complex, my pickup truck following behind, courtesy of a friend from my construction crew who'd helped me coordinate this first step. The morning sun glinted off the car's pristine finish, paid for by my monthly lease payments, detailed by services I'd funded, maintained by insurance I'd purchased. Caleb's condo complex was one of those upscale developments that had sprouted along the Hillsborough River in the past decade. Glass and steel towers reaching toward the sky, filled with young professionals and trust fund kids who thought waterfront views made them successful. I'd actually bid on the construction contract for this place 7 years ago, but lost to a company that cut corners on the foundation work. Looking at the hairline cracks already appearing in the lobby walls, I knew they'd have serious problems in another few years. I parked the BMW in visitor parking and walked up to the 15th floor, each step feeling like progress towards something I should have done years ago. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of climate control, another expense I'd never had to worry about in the modest ranch home I'd built for myself. My knock echoed through the hallway, sharp and businesslike. When Caleb opened the door, he looked like he'd just rolled out of bed. His hair was messed up, his eyes were bloodshot, and he reeked of expensive whiskey. Probably something from Carson's collection. "Dad?" He blinked, confusion replacing the hostility from the night before. "What are you doing here? It's barely 8:30. "Good morning, son," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I'm here for the car keys." He laughed, a short bark of disbelief. "What car keys?" "The BMW keys. The car you drove away from my house last night after calling me a washed-up failure." I held out my hand, palm up. "I'll need those back now." The laughter died in his throat. "Dad, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." I pulled out the lease agreement, the paper crisp with official seals and signatures. "The vehicle is registered in my name, financed through my credit, and insured under my policy. Since you've made it clear you don't respect my judgment or my contributions, you won't need access to them anymore." Caleb's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, then anger. "You can't just take my car." "It's not your car, Caleb. It never was. Just like this condo isn't your condo and that monthly allowance isn't your money. They're all mine, provided to you as gifts that you've decided to treat with contempt." He stepped closer, and I could smell the alcohol more strongly. "This is about last night?" "Come on, Dad, I was just blowing off steam. You know I didn't mean all that stuff." "Actually, I think you meant every word." I kept my hand extended. "The keys, please." "What am I supposed to drive to work?" His voice was rising, drawing attention from neighbors whose doors I could hear opening down the hall. "I assume Carson will provide transportation, since he's the one with real vision and actual success." I let the words hang there for a moment. "Unless you'd like to apologize for last night and have an honest conversation about respect." Caleb's jaw worked silently. I could see the wheels turning, weighing his pride against his practical needs, measuring his new loyalty to Carson against 31 years of my support. Pride won. "Fine," he spat, disappearing into the condo and returning with the BMW keyring. He slammed them into my palm hard enough to leave indentations. "Take it. Carson's got plenty of cars anyway." "I'm sure he does," I replied, pocketing the keys. "Give him my regards." As I walked back down that long hallway, I heard Caleb's door slam with enough force to shake the cheap drywall. But I also heard something else. The sound of him immediately getting on the phone, probably calling Carson or Miranda to complain about his unreasonable father. That was fine. Let them know what was coming. Driving both vehicles back to my house, windows down to let in the morning breeze, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete control over my own life. For too long, I'd been the silent provider, the background figure writing checks while others took credit for success. But construction had taught me something important about foundations. Sometimes you have to tear down the old structure completely before you can build something better. Back home, I spread the financial documents across my dining room table like an architect reviewing blueprints. Each bank statement, each automatic payment, each line of credit told the story of a father who'd been too generous for too long. My first call was to the bank. "First National, this is Jennifer speaking." "Good morning, Jennifer. I need to make some changes to my accounts. I'm David Rodriguez. Account number." I rattled off the digits I'd memorized over 20 years of banking there. "Of course, Mr. Rodriguez. How can I help you today?" "I need to cancel several automatic transfers and close some authorized user accounts." There was a pause, the soft clicking of computer keys. "I see multiple linked accounts here. The monthly transfer to Caleb Rodriguez for $800, correct?" "That's one of them. I also need to remove him as an authorized user on 3 credit card accounts and cancel the additional line on my cell phone plan." "Sir, this is quite a few changes at once. Are you sure you want to?" "I'm absolutely certain. How quickly can these take effect?" "The transfers can be stopped immediately. The credit card removals will take 24 to 48 hours. The cell phone will need to be handled directly with your provider." "Perfect. Let's start with the transfers." By noon, I'd severed every financial connection between myself and Caleb except for the condo mortgage, and that was next on my list. But that required a different approach, one that would take more time to orchestrate properly. My phone had been buzzing constantly with texts from Caleb. "Dad, my card was declined at lunch. What's going on?" "Dad, they turned off my phone. This isn't funny anymore." "Dad, answer your phone." "Fine, I get it. You're mad. Can we talk like adults?" I answered none of them. Instead, I called my attorney. Marcus Webb had been handling legal work for my construction business for 15 years. He was a straight shooter who understood the value of hard work and had little patience for entitled behavior, which was exactly what I needed right now. "Dave, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I need to understand my options regarding some property I own." "What kind of property?" "A condo I purchased for my son. My name's on the deed, my name's on the mortgage, but he's been living there rent-free for 2 years. There was a pause. "I see. And now you want him out?" "I want to understand the legal process for reclaiming my property." "Well, since you're the legal owner and there's no rental agreement, it's technically an eviction of a family member. In Florida, you'd need to give 30 days notice, but given the circumstances, we could expedite things if there's cause." "What constitutes cause?" "Failure to pay agreed-upon rent, damage to the property, violation of reasonable house rules, or," he paused, "substantial disrespect or abuse toward the property owner." I smiled grimly. "I think we can make a case for that last one." "Dave, are you sure you want to go down this road? Family disputes can get messy, especially if lawyers get involved." "Marcus, my son told me I was a washed-up failure, and that he was going to start calling another man father. I'm 58 years old, and I'm done being disrespected by someone I've supported his entire adult life." There was a long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his tone was different, more focused, less questioning. "All right then, let's draft some notices." That evening, as I sat in my workshop behind the house, sanding down a piece of mahogany I was turning into a jewelry box for Sophia's birthday, my phone rang. Miranda's name flashed on the screen. The first time she'd called me directly in over a year. I let it ring 4 times before answering, just to make her wait. "Hello, Miranda." "David, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice was shrill, all pretense of civility abandoned. "Caleb called me in tears. You took his car, cut off his money, turned off his phone. Have you completely lost your mind?" I continued sanding, the rhythmic motion keeping my voice steady. "I removed support that was being taken for granted, nothing more." "That's his car." "Check the registration. He lives in that condo." "Check the deed. You can't just cut him off without warning." "Actually, I can." And I did. There was sputtering on the other end, the sound of someone not accustomed to being contradicted. During our marriage, I'd rarely pushed back against Miranda's decisions. I'd been too busy working to pay for her lifestyle to argue about much of anything. "This is about last night, isn't it?" she continued. "He told me what happened. So he said some things in anger, so what? He's frustrated, David. He sees what Carson's accomplished, what real success looks like, and he wants that for himself. Then Carson can provide it. Carson's not his father. According to Caleb, he is now. So Carson can handle the responsibilities that come with the title." I heard muffled conversation in the background. She was discussing this with someone, probably Carson himself. "David, be reasonable. Carson's offering Caleb opportunities you never could. This internship at his company could set him up for life, but Caleb needs stability while he transitions." "Stability?" I set down the sandpaper and walked to the window, looking out at the small citrus grove I'd planted when Caleb was in high school. "I provided 31 years of stability. I think that's enough." "1 month," she pleaded, her tone shifting to negotiation. "Give him 1 month to get on his feet, and then Carson will take over supporting him. Just don't destroy his life over one argument." "Miranda, I didn't destroy his life. I stopped enabling it. There's a difference. Carson wants to talk to you. I have nothing to say to Carson." "David." I hung up. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Carson. We need to discuss this situation like civilized men. Call me. I deleted it without responding. An hour later, another text. Your pride is hurting your son. I'm offering to help transition him into independence. Don't let stubbornness blind you to what's best for Caleb. Deleted. Then, I know about your financial situation, David. The struggles with your business. I could help with that too if you'd be reasonable. That one made me pause. My construction business was solid, but not spectacular. We'd had some slow months recently, and I'd had to dip into savings to cover payroll a couple of times, but how would Carson know about that unless... My phone rang. Sophia. Dad, are you okay? Caleb called me crying, and Mom's been texting me nonstop. I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you holding up? Honestly, I'm proud of you. Her voice was firm, no hesitation. I've been watching Caleb take advantage of your generosity for years. Someone needed to draw a line. It's not easy. The right thing rarely is. But Dad, Carson's been asking questions about you. About the business, about your finances. I think he's planning something. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of questions? He called the office where I work yesterday, pretending to be interested in hiring your company for a project. But he was asking weird stuff about your bonding capacity, your insurance, whether you'd had any liens or judgments. When I told him to call you directly, he got evasive. So Carson was fishing for ammunition. That explained his comment about my financial situation. The man was preparing for war. Good. Let him come. Thanks for the heads up, sweetheart. Dad, whatever happens, I've got your back. Always. After we hung up, I walked out to my workshop and opened the safe where I kept my important business documents. Insurance policies, bonding paperwork, tax returns, bank statements. Everything was in perfect order, as it had been for 20 years. Let Carson investigate all he wanted. He'd find a small business run honestly and competently, with minimal debt and maximum integrity. But two could play the investigation game. I fired up my laptop and began researching Carson Blackwell's business empire. Public records, property transfers, corporate filings, news articles, anything that might give me insight into my adversary. What I found was interesting indeed. Carson Blackwell's business empire looked impressive on the surface. Luxury developments, commercial properties, a yacht club membership, cars that cost more than most people's houses. But when you looked deeper into the public records, patterns began to emerge. Property transfers that seemed designed to avoid taxes. Corporate structures that obscured actual ownership. Partnerships that dissolved mysteriously right before projects were completed. And most interestingly, a pattern of taking on business partners who later found themselves pushed out of profitable deals. I called an old friend, Tommy Castellanos, who worked as an investigator for the county building inspector's office. We'd known each other for 20 years, ever since he'd inspected the first house I'd ever built as an independent contractor. Tommy, it's Dave Rodriguez. I need a favor. Dave, how's business? Can't complain. Listen, I need to ask about some building permits and inspections, off the record. What's the name? Carson Blackwell, Blackwell Development Group. There was a pause. Ah, shit, Dave. What's your connection to that snake? He married my ex-wife. Why do you call him a snake? Because he's been leaving a trail of pissed-off contractors and unpaid subcontractors across 3 counties. The man's got more complaints filed against him than anyone I've ever seen who's still in business. What kind of complaints? The usual. Agrees to payment schedules, then finds excuses not to pay. Changes orders after work is completed to reduce what he owes. Brings in new partners who somehow assume the debt responsibilities, then disappears when it's time to settle up. My pen was moving across a legal pad as Tommy talked, taking notes like I was planning a building project. You got specific examples? Dave, I shouldn't be telling you this, but last month we had a roofing contractor file a lien against one of Blackwell's properties. Guy did $40,000 worth of work, has all the documentation, but Carson's claiming the work was substandard and refusing to pay. Was the work substandard? I inspected it personally. It's perfect. But the roofer's a small outfit, can't afford to fight it in court, so he's probably going to eat the loss. As I listened, a picture formed of Carson's business model. Use people's work to build his empire, then find ways to avoid paying for it. No wonder he had so much capital for flashy displays of wealth. He was funding them with other people's labor. Tommy, hypothetically, if someone wanted to file complaints about this kind of pattern, what would be the best approach? Hypothetically, the state licensing board loves cases like this, and if there's a pattern of fraud, the Attorney General's office gets very interested very quickly. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the evening making more calls, other contractors, suppliers, even some former employees of Carson's that I tracked down through social media. The story that emerged was consistent. Carson Blackwell was a predator who built his success on the backs of people he then refused to compensate fairly. By midnight, I had a different kind of folder building, one that painted a very different picture of my son's new role model. 3 days after I'd reclaimed the BMW, Caleb finally showed up at my house. It was past 9 p.m. on a Thursday, and I was reading on the porch when his headlights swept across the yard. He was driving a red Porsche, obviously one of Carson's cars, and he looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled, his face was unshaven, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. When he climbed the porch steps, I could smell alcohol on his breath again. "Dad, we need to talk." I marked my place in the book and set it aside. "I'm listening." "This has gone too far. I get it, you're angry. But taking everything away, that's not solving anything. Sit down, son." He hesitated, then settled into the wicker chair across from me. For a moment, we sat in silence, listening to the night sounds of suburban Florida, air conditioners humming, televisions murmuring through screened windows, the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. "Tell me about your internship with Carson," I said finally. Caleb's expression shifted. "What about it? What are you learning? What's he teaching you about real success?" He's showing me how business really works. The big picture stuff you never understood." "Such as?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was less certain than it had been 3 days ago. "He's got me reviewing contracts, looking for ways to reduce costs, finding clauses that can get us out of paying full price for services." "I see. And you think that's good business?" "It's smart business. Carson says you have to look out for yourself first because everyone else is trying to take advantage of you." I leaned forward. "Caleb, do you know who built the foundation for Carson's marina development last year?" "No, why?" "Martinez Construction. Good family business, been around for 30 years. Carson hired them for a $200,000 job, then found excuses to pay them only half after the work was completed." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know anything about that. The family's probably going to lose their business. 3 generations of honest work destroyed because Carson decided he could keep their money." "Dad, you don't understand how complicated these deals are." "I understand perfectly." My voice was harder now. "I understand that Carson builds his fortune by stealing from people like me. People who do honest work and expect honest payment." Caleb was quiet, staring out at the yard where he'd learned to throw a baseball, where I'd taught him to change the oil in his first car, where we'd spent countless evenings talking about his dreams and ambitions. "He offered me a partnership," Caleb said finally. 20% of a new development project. He says I could make more in one deal than you make in 5 years. "And what do you have to put up for this partnership?" "Nothing. Just my time and effort." "Caleb, nobody gives away 20% of a profitable deal to someone who brings nothing to the table. What's he really asking you to do?" My son's silence told me everything I needed to know. "He wants you to help him avoid paying contractors, doesn't he? Use your last name, your connection to the local construction community, to gain trust that he can then exploit." "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that." I stood up, walked to the porch railing, and looked out at the street where I'd taught him to ride a bicycle. Son, Carson doesn't want to make you successful. He wants to use you as a tool to destroy the community that raised you. You're just jealous. I'm heartbroken. The words came out more emotional than I'd intended. I'm heartbroken that you can't see what he really is. We sat in silence after that, the weight of 31 years of father-son history settling between us like a heavy blanket. Finally, Caleb stood. I should go. Where are you staying? Carson's got a guest house. It's temporary until I get on my feet. Caleb. He paused at the top of the porch steps. The offer still stands. Apologize sincerely. Show me you understand what respect means and we can work together to rebuild what you've torn down. He looked back at me, and for just a moment I saw the little boy who used to curl up in my lap during thunderstorms. I can't, Dad. I've gone too far down this road. Then he was gone, the Porsche's engine fading into the night, leaving me alone with the certainty that this war was far from over. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who made me sign 3 different forms acknowledging receipt. The envelope was thick, expensive paper with the letterhead of Morrison Blackwell Associates, attorneys at law. I almost laughed at the obviousness of it. Of course, Carson had his name on his law firm's letterhead. Inside was a cease and desist letter, demanding that I immediately restore all financial support to Caleb and threatening legal action for financial abandonment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The language was formal and intimidating, clearly designed to scare me into compliance. At the bottom, in smaller print, was a handwritten note. David, this doesn't have to get ugly. Call me. Carson. I set the letter on my kitchen counter and made myself a cup of coffee, taking my time to think through the implications. Carson was escalating, trying to use legal intimidation to force me back into the role of silent provider. But there was something desperate about the timing. Why rush into threats instead of letting Caleb handle this himself? My phone rang before I could finish that thought. Marcus Webb, my attorney. Dave, I just got a very interesting call from a lawyer named Morrison. Says he represents your son and wants to discuss a family matter that could be resolved without litigation. Let me guess. Carson Blackwell's legal team? That's exactly right. How did you know? Because Carson's been positioning himself as Caleb's new father figure. I'm surprised it took him this long to lawyer up. Well, he's making some pretty aggressive claims. Financial abandonment, breach of implied contract, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Most of it's bullshit, but he's clearly trying to intimidate you. I walked out to my workshop, the familiar smell of sawdust and machine oil helping me think clearly. What's your assessment? Legally? He's got nothing. You can't be forced to support an adult child who's capable of working, but Dave, this is going to get expensive if he decides to push it. How expensive? If it goes to trial? 20, 30,000 minimum. Maybe more if he drags it out. I thought about my business account, the money I'd been setting aside for retirement, the careful financial planning I'd done over decades of hard work. Carson was betting that I couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Marcus, I want you to do something for me. File a counterclaim. For what? Harassment, extortion, and interference with family relationships. And I want to subpoena Carson's business records as part of our defense. There was a pause. Dave, that's escalating things significantly. Good. It's time someone called his bluff. While Marcus prepared our legal response, I decided to do some investigative work of my own. Carson's weakness was his ego. He loved showing off his success, which meant he left a digital trail of his activities all over social media and business websites. I started with his company's website, which featured glossy photos of luxury developments and testimonials from satisfied partners. But when I cross-referenced the names with public records, I found something interesting. Most of these partners had later filed lawsuits against Carson's companies. Then I moved to social media. Carson's Instagram was a parade of expensive cars, exotic vacations, and photos of himself at charity galas and business conferences. But it also contained something more valuable: timestamps and locations that I could cross-reference with public records of business filings and property transfers. What I found was a pattern of Carson being out of town during crucial periods when his business partners were trying to reach him about payment disputes. He'd be posting photos from Miami Beach, while contractors in Tampa were filing liens against his properties. But the real breakthrough came when I found a series of posts from 18 months ago. Carson at a yacht club in Key West, celebrating a major acquisition with champagne and beautiful women. The date stamp was March 15th of last year. I cross-referenced that date with property records and found something remarkable. On March 15th, Carson had acquired 3 commercial properties in downtown Tampa through foreclosure proceedings. The previous owners were a family business that had been developing the properties for 5 years before running into financial trouble. More digging revealed that the family business had originally been funded by a partnership with Blackwell Development Group. Carson had been their financial partner, responsible for providing construction loans as the project progressed. But according to court documents, Carson had suddenly withdrawn funding 6 months before completion, forcing the family into bankruptcy and allowing him to acquire their properties at a fraction of their value. It was a masterful scheme: provide initial funding to get people dependent on you, then withdraw support at the crucial moment and pick up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. I thought about Caleb, living in Carson's guest house, working on his internship, being groomed for 20% of a development deal. Was my son being set up as the next victim of Carson's predatory business model? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your investigation into my business affairs constitutes harassment. Cease immediately or face legal consequences. CB. So Carson was monitoring my digital activity. That told me 2 things. First, that I was getting close to something important, and second, that he was worried enough to show his hand. I screenshotted the text and forwarded it to Marcus with a note: add cyberstalking to the counterclaim. The break I'd been waiting for came from an unexpected source. Sophia called me on Thursday evening, her voice excited but cautious. Dad, I think I found something. Remember how I told you Carson was asking questions about your business? Of course. Well, he called my office again today, but this time he was asking about something different. He wanted to know if we'd ever done any advertising work for contractors who'd had problems with Blackwell Development Group. I sat up straighter. What did you tell him? I told him that would be confidential client information. But Dad, after he hung up, I got curious, so I did some checking in our client database. And? We've worked with 4 different contractors in the past 2 years who've had disputes with Carson's company. All of them are small businesses. All of them got stiffed for significant amounts of money. How significant? Anywhere from $20,000 to over $100,000. But here's the interesting part. One of them kept really detailed records of their interactions with Carson, documentation that proves he deliberately changed contract terms after work was completed. Who is it? A woman named Elena Vasquez. She runs Vasquez Electrical. Carson hired them for a shopping center renovation, then tried to cut their payment in half by claiming code violations that never existed. Is she willing to talk? More than willing. She's been trying to find other contractors who've been victimized by Carson, thinking maybe they could file a class action lawsuit. The pieces were falling into place. Carson's business model wasn't just unethical, it was potentially criminal if we could prove a pattern of deliberate fraud. Sophia, can you set up a meeting with Elena? Already did. Tomorrow afternoon if you're available. After we hung up, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the tools of honest trade, and felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole conflict began. Hope. Not just for my relationship with Caleb, but for genuine justice. Carson had built his empire by exploiting people like me, people who believed in hard work, fair dealing, and keeping your word. But he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that because we were honest, we were also helpless. Tomorrow I'd begin proving him wrong. Elena Vasquez's office was in a modest strip mall on the east side of Tampa, squeezed between a tax preparation service and a small restaurant that served the best Cuban sandwiches in the city. The sign outside read, Vasquez Electrical, 3 generations of service. And when I walked through the door, I immediately felt at home. The walls were covered with photos of electrical work. Not the glamorous kind that makes magazine covers, but the solid, functional installations that keep buildings running safely. There were pictures of the family too. Elena, with her father and grandfather, all 3 generations wearing the same company shirt, all with the same proud smile of people who took their work seriously. Elena herself was in her 40s, with calloused hands and direct eyes that missed nothing. When Sophia introduced us, her handshake was firm and brief, no wasted motion, no unnecessary pleasantries. "Mr. Rodriguez, Sophia tells me you're having problems with Carson Blackwell." "He's having problems with me," I corrected. "I cut off financial support to my son, and Carson's trying to use lawyers to force me to restore it." "Your son works for Carson?" "Unfortunately, yes." Elena's expression darkened. "Then your son is either very naive or very much like his boss." She led us to a conference table covered with file folders, each one thick with documents. "This is 2 years of dealing with Blackwell Development Group. Contracts, change orders, email correspondence, photographs, inspection reports, everything I could think of to document what happened to us." "Tell me the story." Elena opened the first folder and pulled out a set of blueprints. "March of last year, Carson's company hired us to rewire a shopping center they were renovating. The contract was straightforward, $87,000 for a complete electrical upgrade to bring the building up to current code." She spread the blueprints across the table, pointing to different sections with a pencil. "We did the work exactly to specification. Every wire, every outlet, every circuit breaker installed according to the approved plans. The city inspector signed off on everything. No violations, no problems." "So, what went wrong?" 2 days before final payment was due, Carson's project manager called me to the site for a final walkthrough. That's when they claimed there were code violations that would need to be fixed before they could pay us. Elena pulled out a thick stack of photographs. "I took pictures of everything they claimed was wrong. Every single violation they cited was actually exactly what the blueprints called for. But Carson was betting that I wouldn't fight him because most small contractors can't afford lengthy legal battles." "Did you fight him?" "I hired a lawyer, spent $15,000 I couldn't afford, and ended up settling for 60% of what I was owed. Carson's legal team just dragged things out until I ran out of money to pursue it." Sophia leaned forward. "Elena, how many other contractors has this happened to?" "That I know of personally, at least 8. But I suspect there are more who just absorbed the loss and moved on." Elena opened another folder, this one containing printouts of emails. "The thing is, Carson's not actually that smart. He uses the same tactics every time, and he's cocky enough to put things in writing that he probably shouldn't." She handed me an email chain that made my blood boil. Carson, writing to his project manager, "The electricians are nearly finished. Start documenting problems we can use to reduce the final payment. Target a 30–40% reduction. These small contractors never fight back effectively." He sent this in writing. Carson's arrogant. He assumes that because he has more money and better lawyers, he can bully anyone he wants. I studied the email, noting the date stamp and the casual way Carson discussed cheating contractors out of their money. "Elena, would you be willing to testify about this pattern if it became part of a larger legal case?" "Mr. Rodriguez, I've been waiting 2 years for someone to take this man down. Whatever you're planning, count me in." As we left Elena's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "Dad, Carson says you're trying to destroy his business with false accusations. Why can't you just leave us alone?" I showed the message to Sophia, who shook her head in disgust. "He's really got his hooks in Caleb, doesn't he?" "For now. But sometimes the best way to save someone from a predator is to expose the predator publicly." "What's the next step?" I thought about the folder of evidence Elena had given me, the pattern of fraud we documented, the legal counterclaim Marcus was preparing. Carson wanted a war, and he'd chosen his weapons: lawyers, intimidation, and financial pressure. But I had weapons of my own: truth, documentation, and 35 years of relationships in the local construction community. We're going to turn his strength into his weakness, I told Sophia. Carson's ego makes him sloppy, and his arrogance makes him document his crimes. We're going to use that against him. Monday morning brought another certified letter, this one thicker than the first. Carson was escalating again, now claiming that my defamatory investigation into his business practices constituted tortious interference with his contracts. He was demanding $10,000 in damages and threatening to file criminal charges for harassment. I called Marcus immediately. Dave, this is getting serious. He's really pushing hard. Good. Desperate people make mistakes. What do you mean? I mean, Carson's acting like someone who has something to hide. If his business practices were legitimate, why would he care about my investigation? That's a fair point. What did you find out from that contractor? I summarized my meeting with Elena, focusing on the email evidence of Carson's deliberate fraud. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification on dates and amounts. Dave, this changes things significantly. If we can prove a pattern of deliberate fraud, we're not just defending against his lawsuit. We're talking about potential criminal charges against him. What do we need to make that case? More evidence? Elena's testimony is a good start, but prosecutors like to see patterns. We need more contractors, more documentation, more proof that this wasn't isolated incidents but a systematic business model. I think I know how to get that. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called a press conference. Not a big one, just the business reporter from the Tampa Bay Times and a local TV station that covered construction industry news. But I'd learned something important about Carson from studying his social media. He cared desperately about his public image. We met at Elena's office with her permission. I'd prepared a simple presentation, photocopies of contracts, documentation of Carson's pattern of reducing payments after work was completed, and most importantly, that email where he explicitly discussed cheating contractors. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to expose a predatory business practice that's hurting small contractors throughout the Tampa Bay area. The business reporter, a sharp woman named Jessica Martinez, took notes as I walked through the evidence. Mr. Rodriguez, these are serious accusations. Have you shared this information with law enforcement? We're in the process of doing exactly that. But I felt the public had a right to know about this pattern of behavior, especially other contractors who might be considering doing business with Blackwell Development Group. The TV reporter focused on the human interest angle. This started as a family dispute with your son, is that correct? My son chose to align himself with someone I now know to be a predator, who builds his wealth by cheating honest working people. As a father, I have an obligation to protect my son from that influence, even if he doesn't understand the danger he's in. The story ran that evening on the local news, and by the next morning my phone was ringing constantly. Contractors calling to share their own stories about Carson, reporters wanting follow-up interviews, and most importantly, an investigator from the state attorney's office asking if I'd be willing to meet with them. But the most interesting call came from an unexpected source, a woman who identified herself as Carson's ex-wife. Mr. Rodriguez, my name is Patricia Blackwell. I saw the news story about my ex-husband and I think we need to talk. Patricia Blackwell agreed to meet me at a small coffee shop in Hyde Park, far from Carson's usual haunts. She was an elegant woman in her early 50s, with the kind of understated style that comes from old money rather than new flash. When she sat down across from me, her first words were direct and surprising. Carson is a sociopath, Mr. Rodriguez. I spent 8 years married to him before I figured that out. What do you mean? I mean he has no conscience about hurting people if it benefits him. No empathy for the damage he causes. He sees other people as tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. Patricia stirred her coffee slowly, gathering her thoughts. When I saw your interview on the news, talking about protecting your son from Carson's influence, it reminded me of conversations I had with Carson about business. He used to brag about how easy it was to manipulate people who had strong family connections. How so? He'd find people who were supporting family members, adult children, elderly parents, siblings in trouble, and he'd position himself as someone who could help. Then he'd slowly create dependency while undermining the original support system. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you saying he targeted Caleb specifically? I don't know for certain, but it would fit his pattern. Carson doesn't do anything randomly. If he's investing time and money in your son, it's because he sees a way to profit from it. Patricia opened her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. Mr. Rodriguez, I recorded some conversations with Carson during our divorce proceedings. My lawyer advised it because Carson was making threats about hiding assets and destroying my reputation if I didn't accept his settlement offer. What's on the recordings? Carson describing exactly how he builds relationships with people he intends to exploit, how he identifies their weaknesses, gains their trust, then manipulates them into positions where they become useful to him. She slid the recorder across the table. There's one conversation in particular where he talks about a long-term project involving someone's son. He was very pleased with himself about how he was turning the son against his father while positioning himself as the replacement father figure. My hands were trembling slightly as I picked up the recorder. When was this recorded? 6 months ago, right around the time Carson started dating your ex-wife. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Carson hadn't met Miranda by chance. He'd targeted our family deliberately, seeing an opportunity to exploit the divorce situation to gain leverage over both Miranda and Caleb. Patricia, why are you helping me? Because Carson destroyed my relationship with my own daughter. She was 19 when Carson came into her life, and he spent 2 years convincing her that I was holding her back from her potential. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd cut off all contact with me and moved in with him and his new girlfriend. Where is she now? I don't know. Carson uses her as bait to attract investors to his development projects. She's beautiful and charming and completely under his control. But I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. Patricia's voice broke slightly. Mr. Rodriguez, Carson doesn't just steal money from people. He steals families. And if you don't stop him soon, he's going to take your son away from you permanently. As I sat in that coffee shop, holding a recording that could potentially destroy Carson's carefully constructed image, I realized this war was bigger than just my relationship with Caleb. Carson was a predator who had been operating unchecked for years, leaving a trail of broken families and ruined businesses in his wake. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that because I was just a construction worker, I wouldn't have the resources or the intelligence to fight back effectively. He was about to learn how wrong he was. That night, I sat in my workshop with Patricia's digital recorder, a legal pad, and a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough, listening to Carson Blackwell incriminate himself in his own words. The first recording was from their divorce mediation. Carson's voice smooth and confident as he explained his philosophy to Patricia's lawyer. You have to understand, counselor, success in business requires a certain ruthlessness. People are essentially resources to be utilized efficiently. The key is identifying what motivates them: fear, greed, family loyalty, and then leveraging those motivations to achieve your objectives. The lawyer's voice. Mr. Blackwell, we're here to discuss property division, not business philosophy. Carson's laugh was cold. Everything is business, counselor. Even divorce. Even family relationships, especially family relationships. I fast-forwarded through the legal discussions until I found what Patricia had mentioned. Carson talking about his long-term project. The beauty of this particular situation is the multiple pressure points. The ex-wife wants financial security and social status, easy to provide. The son wants approval and success without having to work for it, also manageable. But the real prize is neutralizing the father. What do you mean? Patricia's voice, carefully neutral. David Rodriguez has been a thorn in my side for years. His construction company keeps underbidding my projects because he's content with smaller profit margins. He has relationships in the community that I need for future development deals. But more importantly, He represents something that threatens my entire business model. Which is? Integrity. The man actually keeps his word to contractors, pays his bills on time, treats people fairly. That kind of behavior makes other developers look bad by comparison. It's bad for the industry when people have unrealistic expectations about business ethics. The recording captured Carson's laugh again, that same cold sound that had no warmth in it. But his greatest weakness is his family loyalty. He'll sacrifice anything for his children. So I cultivate the son, undermine the father's influence, and eventually David becomes irrelevant. Then I can deal with his construction company directly, either force him out of business or acquire his assets at below-market prices. I paused the recording, my hands shaking with rage. Carson hadn't just stumbled into our family drama, he'd orchestrated it. Every argument with Caleb, every comparison to Carson's success, every moment of my son calling me a failure, had been part of a deliberate campaign to destroy my relationship with my child. The recording continued. The son is surprisingly malleable. A few expensive gifts, some insider knowledge about business deals, constant reinforcement that his father is holding him back. It's textbook manipulation. Carson, that's someone's family you're destroying. Patricia, sentiment is expensive. David Rodriguez chose to make himself my competitor. This is just how competition works at a higher level than he's used to. There was more. Discussions of specific contractors Carson had targeted for financial destruction. Plans to acquire their businesses after forcing them into bankruptcy. Even casual mentions of bribing building inspectors to create problems for companies that refused to sell to him. By the time I finished listening to the recordings, I had filled 6 pages with notes, and my whiskey glass was empty. But I also had something more valuable than anger. I had a complete picture of Carson's criminal enterprise and evidence that could bring him down. My phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Dad, Carson says you're planning to release false information about him to the press. He's talking about suing you for everything you have. Please stop this before it's too late. I stared at that message for a long time, seeing not my son's words but Carson's manipulation continuing to work through him. Caleb genuinely believed he was protecting someone who cared about him, not realizing he was just another tool being used against his own father. I texted back, Son, ask Carson about Patricia's recordings. Ask him about his long-term project involving our family. Then decide who's been lying to you. The response came back immediately. What recordings? Dad, you're scaring me. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Sophia's Cafe on Kennedy Boulevard. Come alone and I'll show you who Carson Blackwell really is. There was a long pause before his response. Okay, but Dad, if this is some kind of trick? No tricks, Caleb. Just truth. It's time you heard it. Sophia's Cafe was crowded with the lunch rush when I arrived, the air thick with the smell of Cuban coffee and pressed sandwiches. I chose a corner table where we could have privacy, spread out the documents I'd prepared, and waited. The folder contained photocopies of Elena's evidence, transcripts of the most damaging parts of Patricia's recordings, and documentation of Carson's pattern of targeting families with adult children. Caleb arrived 10 minutes late, looking like he hadn't slept well. He was wearing one of Carson's expensive polo shirts and driving another borrowed car, a BMW this time. But the confidence he'd displayed 2 weeks ago was notably absent. Dad? He sat down heavily, avoiding eye contact. This better be good. Order something to eat first. You look like you haven't been taking care of yourself. I'm fine. Caleb, when's the last time you had a real meal? He shrugged, but when the waitress came over, he ordered a Cuban sandwich and café con leche. While we waited for the food, I slid the first document across the table. This is a contract between Carson's company and Elena Vasquez, an electrical contractor. Read the payment terms. Caleb scanned the document, his brow furrowing. $87,000 on completion of work and city inspection approval. Now read this. I handed him Elena's final payment statement. $52,000. Why the difference? Because Carson decided after the work was completed that there were code violations that needed to be fixed. Except there weren't any code violations. The city inspector signed off on everything. I walked Caleb through Elena's case methodically. The contract, the completed work, the artificial problems Carson created, the deliberate reduction in payment. Then I showed him similar documentation from 3 other contractors. Dad, I don't understand what this has to do with me. Keep reading. The next document was a transcript from Patricia's recording, specifically the part where Carson described his strategy for neutralizing me by manipulating my son. Caleb's face went white as he read. This isn't real. Carson wouldn't say things like this. I have the actual recording, son. Would you like to hear his voice? I pulled out the digital recorder and played the section where Carson described Caleb as surprisingly malleable and detailed his plan to turn my son against me. The food arrived during the playback, but Caleb didn't touch it, just stared at the recorder like it was a snake. He's talking about me, Caleb said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He's talking about destroying our family for business purposes. Every argument we've had, every time you've compared me unfavorably to Carson, every moment you felt like I was holding you back, it was all orchestrated by him. Caleb pushed back from the table. No, that's not. Carson's been helping me. The internship, the partnership opportunity. What partnership opportunity exactly? What are you supposed to contribute to this deal? My knowledge of local contractors, my connections in the construction community. Your last name, you mean? Carson wants to use your relationship to me to gain trust with contractors he plans to cheat. I could see the realization dawning in Caleb's eyes, the pieces falling into place. The expensive gifts, the constant praise, the way Carson always steered conversations toward criticizing me. It had all been calculated manipulation. The 20% partnership, I continued gently. What happens to your stake if the project runs into problems? Carson said, he said I'd be protected, but I'd have to sign some papers first, transferring liability to protect the main company. Caleb, he's setting you up to be the fall guy. When this development project collapses, and it will, because that's how Carson operates, you'll be left holding the legal responsibility while he walks away clean. My son sat in stunned silence, the untouched sandwich growing cold in front of him. Around us, the cafe buzzed with normal conversations, people discussing work projects, family plans, everyday concerns. But at our table, 31 years of father-son relationship hung in the balance. I called you a failure, Caleb said finally. You called me what Carson taught you to call me. I said I wanted to call him father, because he manipulated you into believing I wasn't worthy of the title. Tears were starting in Caleb's eyes now, and I felt my own throat tighten. This was my son. The boy I'd taught to throw a curveball, the teenager who'd helped me build a deck behind our old house, the young man who'd once told me he wanted to follow in my footsteps. Dad, what have I done? You got fooled by a very sophisticated predator. It happens to good people, son. The question is what you're going to do now. Caleb looked down at the evidence spread across our table, documentation of Carson's crimes, proof of his manipulation, evidence that could put him in prison for years. What do you need me to do? I need you to be my son again. Not Carson's protege, not Miranda's golden boy, but the man I raised you to be. And then what? I gathered up the documents, organizing them back into the folder with care. Then we finish what Carson started, but we finish it on our terms. That evening, Caleb sat in my living room for the first time in 2 weeks, looking around like he was seeing it with new eyes. The family photos on the mantle, the furniture I'd built myself, the small touches that made this house a home rather than just an investment property. Dad, I need to tell you something about Carson's business. I set down my coffee mug. I'm listening. The development project he offered me partnership in? It's not what he claimed. The property has environmental issues, contaminated soil from an old gas station that used to be there. Carson knew about it before he bought the land, But he's planning to build anyway without proper remediation. That's illegal. I know. He told me the cleanup cost would eat up all the profits, so he was going to hide the contamination reports and build luxury condos right on top of the contaminated soil. I felt a chill run through me. Caleb, that's not just fraud, that's putting people's health at risk. There's more. Carson's been paying off a building inspector named Williams to sign off on projects without proper inspections. I've seen money change hands twice. Do you have documentation? Some. Carson had me handling the cash payments, said it was part of my business education. I kept copies of the withdrawal receipts and took photos of the meetings. Caleb pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of Carson handing envelopes to a man in a city building inspector's uniform. The photos were clear, well lit, and damning. Why did you document this? Honestly, at first I thought it was cool, seeing how business really worked at the highest levels. But something felt wrong about it, so I started keeping records just in case. Just in case what? Just in case Carson tried to blame me for something later. Even when I believed in him, I didn't entirely trust him. I studied my son's face, seeing a maturity that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. The events of the past few days had forced him to grow up quickly, to see the world as it really was, rather than as Carson had painted it. Caleb, this evidence you've gathered, it's enough to put Carson in prison for years. But testifying against him will be dangerous. He's not going to just accept defeat quietly. I understand, Dad. But I can't let him keep hurting people like Elena, like Patricia's daughter, like our family. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything Caleb had observed during his time in Carson's organization. The environmental cover-up, the bribery scheme, the systematic fraud against contractors, even evidence of money laundering through shell companies Carson had established. By the time we finished, we had enough evidence to interest not just local prosecutors but federal agencies as well. What's our next move? Caleb asked. Tomorrow, we meet with the FBI. The FBI? Son, Carson's crimes cross state lines and involve federal environmental laws. This is bigger than a local prosecutor can handle. That night, as Caleb headed to bed in his old room, he'd moved back home immediately after our cafe meeting, I called Marcus Webb to bring him up to speed. Dave, this is extraordinary. With Caleb's testimony and the evidence he's gathered, we're not just defending against Carson's lawsuit anymore. We're talking about bringing down a major criminal enterprise. What about the risks? There are risks. Carson's going to fight back hard when he realizes what's happening. But with federal protection and the strength of the evidence, I think we can minimize those risks. After hanging up with Marcus, I walked out to my workshop and sat among the tools of my trade, the honest implements of legitimate work. For 35 years, I'd built things that lasted, created value through my own labor, kept my word to everyone I'd dealt with. Carson had built his empire through theft, manipulation, and fraud. He'd targeted my family because he saw my integrity as a threat to his business model. But integrity, it turned out, was a more powerful weapon than he'd anticipated. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Dad, Caleb called me. He told me everything. I'm so proud of both of you. Then another message, this one from an unknown number. David, I know what you're planning. Back off now or you'll regret it. This is your only warning. CB. I screenshotted Carson's threat and forwarded it to Marcus with a note. Add witness intimidation to the charges. Then I texted back, see you in court, Carson. The war was about to end, but not the way Carson had expected. Special Agent Maria Santos met us at the federal building in downtown Tampa, her credentials impressive, and her demeanor all business. The conference room where we gathered was sterile and windowless, but it felt like the safest place in the world, as Caleb spread out his evidence across the table. Gentlemen, I've reviewed the preliminary materials your attorney provided. This is potentially a very significant case. Agent Santos was younger than I'd expected, probably early 40s, but she had the kind of focused intensity that suggested years of experience dealing with white-collar criminals. Mr. Rodriguez, she continued, addressing Caleb, I need to understand exactly what you witnessed and when. Start from the beginning. For the next 3 hours, Caleb walked through his time in Carson's organization with painful detail. The environmental cover-up that could poison hundreds of families. The bribery scheme that had corrupted the building inspection process for dozens of projects. The systematic fraud that had destroyed small businesses across 3 counties. Agent Santos took notes constantly, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting specific documents. When Caleb showed her the photos of Carson bribing Inspector Williams, she leaned forward with obvious interest. "Mr. Rodriguez, are you willing to wear a wire?" "What do you mean?" "We'd like you to go back to Carson, pretend you've reconciled with your father but want to continue working with him. With a recording device, we could capture him discussing these crimes in his own voice." I felt my protective instincts flare. "Agent Santos, that seems extremely dangerous." "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, addressing me now, "Carson Blackwell is a sophisticated criminal who's been operating with impunity for years. To build a case that will stick, we need him on record admitting to these crimes. Your son is our best chance to get that evidence." Caleb looked between Agent Santos and me, then spoke up. "I'll do it." "Son, this isn't a game. Carson's already threatened us once." "Dad, he's been threatening people for years. Someone needs to stop him." Agent Santos nodded approvingly. "We'll have surveillance teams positioned at all times. Mr. Rodriguez will never be alone with Carson without backup nearby." We spent another hour going over the details. Caleb would return to Carson's organization, claiming that our father-son meeting had been a reconciliation, but that he was still interested in the business opportunities Carson had offered. He'd wear a sophisticated recording device that looked like a normal smartphone, and federal agents would monitor every conversation. "What about my ex-wife?" I asked. "Miranda's completely under Carson's influence. She'll be devastated when this comes out." "Mr. Rodriguez will need her testimony as well. Carson's manipulation of your family relationships is part of his pattern of criminal behavior." As we left the federal building, Caleb was quiet and thoughtful. Finally, as we reached my truck, he spoke. "Dad, what if Carson figures out what I'm doing?" "Then you run. You don't try to be a hero, you don't try to get more evidence. You run and let the FBI handle it." "What if he tries to hurt you or Sophia?" I thought about the tools in my workshop, the security system I'd installed in my house, the network of friends and colleagues who'd watch out for my family. "Your old man's tougher than he looks, son, and Sophia's staying with a friend until this is over." That evening, Caleb called Carson to arrange a meeting. I listened from the kitchen as he delivered his performance. "Carson, I've been thinking about our conversation, about the opportunities you offered me." Carson's voice was cautious through the speaker. "I thought your father had poisoned you against me. We talked, he's stuck in his ways, you know. But I can see the bigger picture now. I want to learn from you." "What changed your mind?" "Honestly, sitting in that federal building today with FBI agents asking me questions about you, I realized I don't want to be on the wrong side of this." There was a long pause. When Carson spoke again, his voice was different, calculating, predatory. "Meet me tomorrow at the marina, slip 47. We need to discuss how to handle this situation." After Caleb hung up, we looked at each other across the kitchen table. "You did good, son." He bought it. "Dad, what if?" "No what ifs. We trust the plan, we trust the FBI, and we trust each other. That's how we win this." The next morning dawned clear and humid, typical Florida weather that would have been perfect for fishing if we'd been doing anything normal. Instead, I sat in an unmarked van 3 blocks from the marina, watching Agent Santos monitor the feeds from Caleb's recording equipment. "Audio is clear, video is stable," she reported into her radio. "Subject is approaching the target location." On the small screen in front of us, I could see Carson's yacht, a 60-foot monstrosity named Leverage that probably cost more than most people's houses. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. Caleb appeared on camera as he walked down the dock, looking nervous but determined. The recording device hidden in his phone was picking up everything clearly. The sound of water lapping against hulls, seagulls calling overhead, the distant hum of traffic from the causeway. "Remember," Agent Santos said into her microphone, "get him talking about specific crimes. We need details, dates, amounts." Carson emerged from the yacht's cabin as Caleb approached, and even through the camera feed, I could see the tension in both men's postures. "Caleb, good to see you. Come aboard." The next hour was the longest of my life. I watched my son sit across from a man who'd manipulated our family for months, pretending friendship while secretly recording evidence that would destroy Carson's criminal empire. Carson started cautiously, probing to see if Caleb was really back under his influence or if this was some kind of setup. But gradually, as Caleb played his role perfectly, Carson's ego and arrogance took over. "The thing about your father, Caleb, is that he doesn't understand how the world really works. He thinks construction is about building things, when it's really about controlling things." "What do you mean?" "Take this marina development we're planning. Your father would build it honestly, pay all the contractors fairly, follow every regulation. He'd make maybe 10% profit. And you?" Carson's laugh was captured clearly by the recording device. "I'll make 60% profit by cutting corners your father would never cut." "Such as?" "Well, there's that contaminated soil issue we discussed. Remediation would cost $2 million. But if we just build over it and don't tell anyone." "Isn't that illegal?" "Only if you get caught. And Inspector Williams has already agreed to sign off on the foundation work without actually inspecting the soil conditions." "For how much?" $50,000. Cheap insurance, really." Agent Santos was taking notes furiously, signaling her team to prepare for arrest. But Carson wasn't finished incriminating himself. "The beauty of this system, Caleb, is that everyone's complicit. The inspector takes his money and keeps quiet. The contractors do the work without asking questions about soil reports. The buyers never know what they're purchasing until it's too late. What about the families who'll live there?" Carson shrugged, the gesture visible through Caleb's camera. "Not my problem. By the time any health issues surface, I'll have sold my stake and moved on to the next project." "And if people get sick?" "Plausible deniability. We'll claim we never knew about the contamination, that previous owners were responsible. It's not like they can prove intent." I watched my son's face on the monitor, seeing the disgust he was working to hide. Carson was describing a plan that could poison dozens of families, and he was talking about it like it was a routine business decision. "Carson, what about my father's investigation? The FBI questioned me yesterday." "Your father's a nuisance, but not a real threat. Small-time thinking, small-time connections. As for the FBI..." Carson leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating from every gesture. "I've been dealing with federal investigations for years. The key is having the right people in the right places." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say I have friends in the U.S. Attorney's Office who keep me informed about any investigations that might affect my business interests." Agent Santos's eyes widened. Federal corruption was an even more serious crime than the environmental and fraud charges they'd been building. "Who are these friends?" "Better you don't know specifics, but trust me, any case against me will disappear long before it reaches a courtroom." That was when Carson made his fatal mistake. Feeling completely secure, believing he had Caleb back under his control, he opened a laptop and showed my son detailed financial records of his criminal enterprise. "This is how real business works, Caleb. See this column? That's what I should have paid contractors. This column is what I actually paid. The difference is profit." The camera captured everything clearly. Spreadsheets showing systematic fraud against dozens of contractors, totaling over $3 million in stolen money. "And this file," Carson continued, clicking to another document, "tracks my payments to various officials, building inspectors, zoning board members, even a few city council members. It's all about building the right relationships." "You keep records of bribes?" "Insurance, Caleb. If anyone ever tries to prosecute me, I can take half the city government down with me. It's mutually assured destruction." Agent Santos was already signaling her teams. Carson had just provided enough evidence to bring down a corruption network that extended far beyond his development company. The meeting concluded with Carson giving Caleb specific instructions for his role in the contaminated marina development. Use his connection to me to recruit contractors who would work without asking questions about environmental issues, help identify which building inspectors might be open to bribes, and gradually take over the financial relationship with various corrupt officials. Think of it as your graduate course in real business, Caleb. By the time this project is finished, you'll understand how power actually works in this world. As Caleb left the yacht, promising to start work immediately, I saw him take a deep breath of relief. He'd done it, gathered evidence that would put Carson away for decades while exposing a corruption network that had been harming the Tampa Bay area for years. "Outstanding work," Agent Santos said into her radio. "All teams, prepare for coordinated arrests. We're taking down the entire network." But Carson had one final surprise waiting for us. As Caleb walked back toward shore, his part in the sting operation complete, Carson made a phone call that Agent Santos's surveillance team intercepted. "Williams, it's Carson. We have a problem. I think the Rodriguez kid might be working with federal agents." Through their electronic surveillance, the FBI team heard Inspector Williams's panicked response. "What do you want me to do?" "Disappear the marina development files. All of them. Environmental reports, soil samples, inspection records, everything. And call Judge Morrison. Tell him we need that injunction against David Rodriguez filed immediately." "What injunction?" "The one claiming he's harassing my business partners with false accusations. I want him arrested for criminal harassment before he can testify to anyone." Agent Santos was already on her radio, coordinating with other teams. "We need to move now. They're destroying evidence and trying to have our witnesses arrested." What followed was like something out of a movie. FBI teams descended on Carson's yacht, Williams's office at the building department, Judge Morrison's chambers, and the storage facility where Carson kept his backup financial records. But Carson had learned one last lesson from years of criminal behavior: always have an escape plan. As federal agents boarded his yacht, Carson was already climbing into a speedboat tied to the stern. The engine roared to life, and he headed toward the mouth of Tampa Bay at high speed, hoping to reach international waters before the Coast Guard could intercept him. From our position on shore, I watched the chase unfold. Carson's speedboat weaving between anchored sailboats and fishing vessels, a Coast Guard cutter closing in from the north, FBI helicopters providing aerial surveillance. "Dad, is he going to get away?" Caleb asked, standing beside me on the marina dock. "Son, where's he going to go? We've got his financial records, his criminal associates, and hours of recorded confessions. Even if he escapes to another country, his empire is finished." The chase ended 20 minutes later when Carson's boat ran out of fuel 3 miles from shore. Coast Guard divers pulled him from the water as he tried to swim toward a passing cargo ship, and by sunset, he was in federal custody. But the day's revelations weren't over yet. That evening, as federal agents continued processing evidence from the raids, Agent Santos called us back to the federal building for a briefing that would change everything I thought I knew about Carson's manipulation of my family. "Gentlemen, we've been going through Carson's financial records and computer files. What we've found goes far beyond what we expected." She spread out documents across the conference table, each one more shocking than the last. "Carson's targeting of your family wasn't random or opportunistic. It was part of a systematic campaign to acquire your construction business." "What do you mean?" "Your company has contracts for 3 major development projects over the next 2 years. Combined value, $12 million. Carson wanted those contracts, but he couldn't compete with your pricing because you operate honestly." Agent Santos pulled out a thick file labeled Rodriguez Project. "Carson has been planning to destroy your business for 18 months. The manipulation of your son was just the first phase. Phase 2 involved bankrupting you through legal costs and family disruption. Phase 3 was acquiring your company's assets during the bankruptcy proceedings." I stared at the documents, seeing my life laid out like a business plan to be dismantled. "He investigated everyone close to you looking for leverage points. Your ex-wife's desire for financial security, your son's ambition and insecurity, your daughter's loyalty to family. What about Sophia? Carson was planning to approach her next, offering her a high-paying job at his marketing firm. The goal was to isolate you completely, turn your children against you, financial pressure from legal battles, business disruption from corruption accusations. Caleb was pale as he read through Carson's plans. Dad, he was going to frame you for building code violations. Inspector Williams was supposed to discover problems with your past projects and recommend criminal charges. It's all here, Agent Santos continued. Email discussions about planting evidence, bribing witnesses, even plans to sabotage your current construction sites to create safety violations. The scope of Carson's conspiracy was breathtaking. He'd planned to destroy not just my business but my reputation, my relationships with my children, and my financial security, all so he could acquire my company's contracts and relationships. There's one more thing, Agent Santos said quietly. We found recordings of phone calls between Carson and your ex-wife. She played a brief clip, Miranda's voice discussing their plans for Caleb. David's too attached to that boy. If we can turn Caleb completely against him, David will either give up the business or make mistakes we can exploit in court. I never want to see my children hurt over this. Miranda, David's business is worth millions. Once we control it, Caleb will have real opportunities instead of just construction work. I closed my eyes, listening to the woman I'd loved for 15 years casually discussing the destruction of my relationship with our son. But when I opened them, Caleb was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child. Complete trust. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Son, you were the victim here, not the perpetrator. Carson and your mother manipulated you because they knew how much I love you. Agent Santos gathered up the documents. Mr. Rodriguez, with this evidence, Carson's looking at federal charges that could put him away for 30 years. Inspector Williams is cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence, and will need your ex-wife's testimony about her role in the conspiracy. What about my business? The contracts Carson was trying to steal. All protected now. In fact, with Carson's company dissolved and his corrupt network exposed, you'll probably have more opportunities than ever. As we left the federal building that night, Tampa's skyline glittering across the bay, I put my arm around my son's shoulders. Caleb, what are you going to do now? I want to work with you, Dad. Learn the business the right way. Build things that last instead of schemes that hurt people. It's hard work. Long hours, honest profit margins, treating people fairly even when you don't have to. Sounds perfect. The next morning brought a phone call I'd been expecting but dreading. Miranda, her voice breaking with panic and rage. David, what have you done? Carson's in jail, federal agents are asking me questions, and they're freezing all our accounts. Miranda, Carson's a criminal. He's been stealing from contractors, bribing officials, and planning to poison families with contaminated developments. That's not true. He's a successful businessman. He built his success by cheating people like me. People who do honest work and expect honest payment. I need you to fix this, David. Call your lawyer, get the charges dropped, make this go away. I walked out to my workshop, needing the familiar comfort of my tools and unfinished projects. Miranda, I can't fix this. Carson committed federal crimes and there's evidence of everything. What about Caleb? What about our family? Our family? You mean the family you were planning to destroy so Carson could steal my business? There was silence on the line. She knew about the recordings, knew that her own voice was part of the evidence against Carson's conspiracy. David, please. I made mistakes, but I never wanted anyone to get hurt. You wanted Caleb to hate me. You wanted my business to fail. You wanted Carson to replace me in our children's lives. I wanted financial security. I wanted a better life for all of us. At the cost of my relationship with my son, at the cost of poisoning innocent families, at the cost of destroying honest contractors who never did anything wrong. Miranda was crying now, the sound carrying across the phone line like an echo from our marriage's final days. What happens to me now? That depends on what you tell the FBI and how truthfully you tell it. Will you help me? I looked around my workshop, at the half-finished jewelry box for Sophia, at the tools that had supported our family for decades, at the honest work that Carson had seen as a threat to his criminal empire. Miranda, I'll make sure you have a good lawyer, but I can't save you from the consequences of your choices. The call ended with her sobbing, and I felt a sadness that had nothing to do with anger or revenge. This was the mother of my children, the woman I'd loved for 15 years, and she'd chosen greed over family, lies over truth. But my children were safe now, and that was what mattered most. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching Carson Blackwell face the consequences of his crimes. The trial had been a sensation in Tampa, exposing corruption that reached into city government, building departments, and even the federal prosecutor's office. Carson had aged significantly during his time in jail. The tan was gone, the expensive clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit, the arrogant swagger reduced to nervous fidgeting as prosecutors presented evidence of his criminal enterprise. Caleb testified with quiet dignity, walking the jury through his time in Carson's organization and the recordings that had captured Carson's confessions. Elena Vasquez testified about the systematic fraud against contractors. Patricia Blackwell described Carson's pattern of destroying families for business purposes, and I testified about the investigation that had uncovered Carson's plan to destroy my business and relationships. The defense tried to paint Carson as a successful businessman whose aggressive tactics had been misunderstood by unsophisticated competitors, but the evidence was overwhelming. Recordings, financial documents, testimony from multiple victims, and Carson's own emails describing his criminal activities. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: fraud, bribery, environmental crimes, racketeering, and conspiracy. Judge Patricia Hawkins sentenced Carson to 28 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay restitution of over $8 million to his victims. Mr. Blackwell, the judge said as she pronounced sentence, you used your intelligence and resources to build a criminal empire that harmed dozens of families and corrupted public institutions. You showed no remorse for the damage you caused and no respect for the rule of law. The sentence I'm imposing reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the need to protect the community from your predatory behavior. Carson showed no emotion as he was led away in shackles, but I saw him glance once toward the gallery where Miranda sat with her own lawyer. She'd received 2 years probation in exchange for her cooperation, but their relationship was over. Their shared dream of easy wealth destroyed by the reality of federal prison. As we left the courthouse, Caleb walked beside me in the Florida sunshine. Dad, do you think justice was served? I think justice was served, but that's not really the point. What do you mean? The point is that we rebuild. Carson destroyed a lot of relationships and hurt a lot of people. Our job now is to help fix what he broke. 1 year after Carson's sentencing, Rodriguez Construction had doubled in size. With Carson's corrupt network exposed and eliminated, honest contractors were getting fair opportunities for the first time in years. The contracts Carson had tried to steal were mine now, along with several others from clients who appreciated working with someone they could trust. Caleb had started at the bottom, learning every aspect of the business from foundation work to project management. He worked harder than any employee I'd ever had, determined to prove that he understood the value of honest work. Dad, I've been thinking about the marina development. We were standing on the site where Carson had planned to build luxury condos over contaminated soil. After his arrest, the property had been properly remediated and was now being developed as affordable housing for working families. What about it? I want to establish a scholarship fund for kids whose parents work in construction, help them go to college without having to compromise their values. That's a good idea, son. I want to call it the Elena Vasquez Memorial Fund. Elena had passed away 3 months earlier, her long battle with cancer finally ending in a peaceful death surrounded by family. But before she died, she'd seen Carson convicted and her stolen money returned with interest. She'd like that. Sophia joined us on the construction site, her marketing firm now handling accounts for several contractors who'd been victimized by Carson's schemes. She'd helped Elena's family file their own civil lawsuit and had become something of an advocate for small business owners fighting corrupt developers. Dad, there's something I want to tell you both. What's that, sweetheart? I'm pregnant. The news hit me like a physical blow, but a good one. A grandchild, a new generation, a chance to build something positive from the ashes of our family's destruction. Does this mean I'm going to be an uncle? Caleb asked, grinning. Unless you have any better ideas. We stood there on that construction site, 3 generations of Rodriguez family, past, present, and future, looking out at honest work being done by honest people for honest wages. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. Heard about the baby. Congratulations. I know you'll be a wonderful grandfather. I showed the message to my kids. Are you going to forgive her? Sophia asked. I already have. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or trusting again. It just means letting go of the anger. What about Carson? I thought about Carson Blackwell, sitting in a federal prison cell, his empire destroyed, his relationships shattered, his future reduced to 28 years of orange jumpsuits and institutional food. Carson made his choices. He chose greed over integrity, manipulation over honesty, destruction over building. He'll have to live with those consequences. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just accepted his behavior? If you'd let him manipulate Caleb and destroy your business? Every day. But then I remember something important. What's that? We're not just building structures. We're building a community. And communities only work when people keep their word, treat each other fairly, and stand up to those who don't. As the sun set over Tampa Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I watched my son and daughter discuss their plans for the future. Caleb was designing a youth center for the affordable housing development. Sophia was organizing a support network for small business owners fighting corruption. My phone rang one more time. A contractor I'd never met calling to ask if I was the David Rodriguez who'd exposed Carson Blackwell. Yes, I am. Mr. Rodriguez, my name is Roberto Chen. I run a roofing company in Orlando. I've got a project that might interest you. A hospital expansion. The last developer who approached us wanted us to cut corners on materials to increase his profit margin. We told him no, and he dropped us from the project. What changed? We heard about what you did. Standing up to corruption, protecting your family, doing the right thing even when it was expensive. We want to work with someone like that. I looked at Caleb, who was listening to the conversation with interest. Mr. Chen, I think we'd like to work with someone like you too. The project Roberto described would be our biggest ever, a 2-year contract worth $15 million. Honest work, fair profit, proper materials, and the knowledge that what we built would help people for decades to come. Dad, Caleb said after I hung up, do you think we're ready for something that big? Son, we've been ready our whole lives. We just needed the opportunity. 5 years later, the Rodriguez Construction Company Christmas party was held in the youth center Caleb had designed, surrounded by the affordable housing development where Carson had planned to poison families. The building was full of employees, their families, and community members whose lives had been improved by the honest work we'd done together. My granddaughter, Elena Rodriguez Chen, Sophia had married Roberto the year before, toddled between the adults, charming everyone with her 4-year-old perspective on the world. She had Sophia's intelligence and my stubborn streak, a combination that promised interesting teenage years ahead. Caleb was now a full partner in the business, having earned his place through 5 years of hard work and unwavering integrity. He'd married Elena Vasquez's daughter Maria, carrying on the legacy of the woman who'd helped expose Carson's crimes. Dad, I've got news, Caleb announced as the party wound down. Good news or challenging news? Both. Roberto's been asked to bid on a federal project, rebuilding infrastructure in Puerto Rico after the hurricane damage. They want Rodriguez Construction as the primary contractor. That's a big responsibility. It's also a chance to help people who really need it. but it would mean moving the whole operation to San Juan for 18 months. I looked around the youth center, at the families celebrating together, at the community we'd helped build through honest work and fair dealing. What do you think we should do? I think we should go where we're needed most. 6 months later, Rodriguez Construction established a temporary headquarters in San Juan, Puerto Rico. We brought 30 employees from Tampa and hired 60 more locally, providing jobs for people whose lives had been devastated by natural disaster. The work was harder than anything we'd ever done, rebuilding hospitals, schools, and housing in communities that had lost everything. But it was also the most meaningful work of my career, knowing that every foundation we poured and every structure we built was giving families hope for the future. One evening, as I watched the sunset over San Juan Bay, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Former Florida developer Carson Blackwell found dead in federal prison. The article was brief. Carson had suffered a heart attack in his cell, dying alone at age 61. There was no mention of family at the funeral, no testimonials from business associates, no legacy beyond the communities he'd harmed and the people he'd betrayed. I felt no satisfaction in his death, only sadness for a life that had been wasted on greed and manipulation instead of building something worthwhile. That night, I called both my children to tell them the news. "How do you feel about it, Dad?" Sophia asked. "I feel grateful," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of the answer. Grateful? Grateful that our family survived his attempts to destroy us. Grateful that we learned the difference between success and accomplishment. Grateful that we chose to build instead of steal. What's the difference between success and accomplishment? Success is what other people see. Accomplishment is what you know you've built. As I hung up the phone and walked out onto the balcony of our temporary apartment, I could see the lights of the hospitals and schools and housing developments we were rebuilding. Honest work, done by honest people, for families who deserved better than what they'd been given. In the distance, a construction crane moved slowly against the starlit sky, lifting materials for tomorrow's work. The sight filled me with the same satisfaction I'd felt 35 years earlier when I'd built my first house. The knowledge that something lasting and valuable was being created by the work of my hands. Carson Blackwell had tried to teach my son that construction was about controlling things, but he'd been wrong. Construction was about building things, and we were still building. If you enjoyed this story of family, justice, and the triumph of integrity over corruption, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts about David's journey in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? What would you have done in his situation? For more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges, click the notification bell and check out our playlist of family drama stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the strongest foundation you can build is built on truth.